Hello, friends. Well, I've decided to face my fears. I'm going to push past my creative comfort zone and try things that scare me a little. I've always avoided drawing people because it's really hard, but it's time to suck it up and do the hard thing, starting with a simple portrait sketch. Before I get started, I'd love if you'd like, comment, subscribe, and watch till the very end because it really helps the channel. The first thing I did was draw a proportion guide. Before I started recording, I watched this video from the Lazy Arts channel, which is a really simple tutorial on the proportions of the face, and I found that to be super helpful. I'll share a link to that video in the description. I've never really had any consistent practice with drawing faces. In art school, I took a couple introductory classes to figure drawing, but that was like 30 years ago. And those classes didn't really focus on portraits, so I never properly learned about the proportions of the face. One thing I do remember about those figure drawing classes is how hard it was, first of all, and I always struggled with the proportions of the body, so I really wanted to have a drawing guide of some kind to help keep me on track. Okay, once that was done, I dropped the opacity on that template and I kept it in the background as my guide. This is a photo I used as a reference, and I figured the best place to start would be the eyes. So I drew the irises first. I'm not sure if that's how you're supposed to do it, but that's what I did. I really had no idea of how big they should be. I just used the marks on the template as a hint for where the center of the irises might be, and I drew circles around that. Then I had to figure out the shape of the eye, which was more challenging than I expected. They're definitely not perfect, but I tried to at least make them about the same size. Now this area on the template looked pretty short compared to the length of her nose on the reference, so I decided to start the nose a little further down. Since the template is just a generic guide for the human face, I assume that these kinds of adjustments will always need to be made when drawing portraits, since everybody's features are different. But I happen to imagine that there's a limit to how far those adjustments can go before a face starts to look a little alien. I should probably watch some portrait drawing videos to see how the pros do it. If you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments. Okay, the lips were also very hard to draw. Honestly, I quickly got frustrated, so I decided to move on to something else and then come back to it. So I decided to get the overall shape of the face figured out before I got too deep into the details with all the specific features. Again, it took me a while to get the shape right, and I'm still not sure that I quite got it. This process really made it clear to me that I need much more practice with drawing from a reference. Most of the drawing I typically do is imaginative, and even if I use a reference photo, I usually interpret what I see rather than try to recreate it really accurately. So drawing accurately from a reference is a skill I definitely need to develop. I just don't have that muscle memory built in right now. Okay, I did a quick outline for the eyebrows. And I still felt like the eyes were too big, so I fumbled my way through some adjustments. By the way, I did this entire sketch with the Huntsman pencil, which is a Procreate default brush and one of my favorites. If you're looking for a good sketching pencil, I ranked my favorites in this video, which I'll link to. Once I got the size adjusted, I started working on the details around the eye. I added the fold below, then the eyelid crease at the top, and those shadows by the nose bridge and above the eyelid. Then I figured I'd go ahead and fill in the eyebrows because I thought it might help to pull the features together a bit more. So with that eyebrow drawn in, I realized the iris needed to be much darker. And she's wearing eyeliner in the photo, so I darkened the top line as well, but I got a little heavy-handed there. All right, then I added a little shading on the eyeball. And it's starting to look human. That iris needs to be a little darker though. Next, I moved on to the eyelashes, and I tried to follow the reference as closely as possible, but in the end, I felt like they were a little too dramatic. But before making changes, I decided to do the other eye first and then come back to that. So with the left eye, first I adjusted the shape because I still felt like it wasn't quite right. And then I realized with all those adjustments, the left eye ended up being lower than the right one. So I drew a line on another layer to check just to make sure. And yes, it was not lined up at the bottom and definitely way off at the top. So I needed to move that up a little. Once it was better aligned, I worked on adding details to that left eye. At this point, I remembered that I had adjusted the size of the other iris. So I did some erasing to make this one smaller, and then I got back to the details. I thought these lashes turned out better, so I went back to the right eye to fix the lashes on that side. Luckily, I drew them on a separate layer, so I was able to erase them without ruining the rest of the eye. Next, I worked on adding a bit of shading and definition to the nose. Then I tried to make the lips look more realistic. So I tried to adjust the shape and added some shading and highlights to give them more volume. I still really struggled with those lips. The shape wasn't right and they looked like they were a bit too close to the nose, so I nudged them down a bit. And when I studied the reference a bit more, I realized that I drew the lips too wide. So I cheated a little and used the transform tool to adjust the shape. It still wasn't perfect, but it was better. And at this point, to be honest, I was tired of fiddling with it. So I moved on to doing some shading to try to define the shape of the face a little more. So details like the dimple in her chin and that squarish shape of her chin as well. And I tried to add the shadows along the side of her face because everything was feeling really flat. Then I quickly sketched in her braids just to complete the shape of the head and worked on the ears and earrings. I was actually pleased with how the ears turned out. I didn't make them super detailed, but I thought they looked fairly realistic for a sketch. Then it was onto the neck, and I just drew a couple loose lines for the clavicles. I also used really broad, loose strokes for the braids. A little shading on the neck. Then when I went back to finish the braids on top, I realized that more of the top of her head is visible on the photo than what I had drawn. Maybe her head is slightly tilted down in the photo. I'm not sure. Anyway, I had to adjust the position of the braids at the top, but I didn't focus too much on trying to get every detail in the hair. A little more shading along the edges, and that's where I called it quits. Let's see how long that took me. I spent an hour and 7 minutes on this sketch. That's a pretty long time for a sketch, but you know, I'm a newbie at this, so I guess it's not terrible. I'm not gonna lie though, that was a tense hour and 7 minutes. I usually find sketching to be really relaxing, but my brain was working overtime on this one. Overall, I think I did okay. It looks like a person. It doesn't exactly look like the reference, but it looks like a person. As I mentioned earlier, my big thing is to work on accuracy. Let's see, when I compare side by side, I see that the hairline needed to be a bit lower. The eyes and eyebrows needed to be lower down on the face as well. But I'm happy to see that my instincts were right about the positioning of the nose and the mouth. The eyebrows on my sketch are a little thin. The eyebrows on the reference are definitely thicker. And when I was done filming, I realized that I completely forgot to add shading to the nostrils. I definitely have some things to work on, but I'm going to keep practicing. If you have any suggestions for how I can improve, I'm all ears. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.